Why calm people always win. The psychology of emotional control. When emotions rise, most people lose control. This is not a judgment. It is a description of a specific and predictable neurological event that occurs in the majority of people in the majority of high-activation social and professional situations. The emotional system activates, the deliberate, rational cognitive processing degrades. The behavioral output is produced by the activated state rather than by the considered mind. And the person who made the sharp comment, the impulsive decision, the defensive reaction, they did not intend to. They were moved by something they were not governing. The calm person does not react. They observe. They allow the situation to develop further than the reactive person's urgency can tolerate. They actually think, from the deliberate mode that the regulated internal state preserves, and they act with precision calibrated to what the situation actually requires rather than to what the activated state was demanding. This is why they win. Not in every individual exchange, not always visibly or immediately, but consistently, cumulatively, across the pattern of the many situations that constitute a career, a relationship, a life. The win is not primarily about defeating others. It is about maintaining the specific cognitive and behavioral quality that produces the best available outcomes, the clear assessment, the considered response, the maintained standards, and the conditions that are specifically designed to prevent these things. Difficult conditions, provocative people, high-stakes situations, sustained pressure. The calm person navigates all of these with a quality of engagement that the reactive person, governed by their activated state, cannot match. This audiobook is the specific development of that quality. 10 chapters, each building a distinct dimension of the calm that produces the psychological advantage. Not the performed calm of the managed exterior, the genuine calm of the person who has built the internal architecture that keeps the deliberate mind governing their behavior even when the activated state is pressing hard to take over. By the end of this audiobook, the way you engage with the situations, people, and pressures that most consistently push others toward reactive behavior will be specifically and permanently different. Because you will have built what makes the difference, the specific internal architecture of the person who observes when others react, who thinks when others have stopped, and who wins through the specific power of the disciplined, regulated, genuinely calm mind. Introduction. The architecture of winning. Winning through calm is not a social strategy. It is a cognitive reality. The cognitive reality is this: the calm person in any high-pressure social or professional situation has access to a specific set of cognitive capacities, the broader attentional field, the fuller option set, the longer consequence evaluation horizon that the reactive person, whose cognitive architecture has been partially shut down by the activation state, does not have access to in that moment. These capacities produce better decisions. Better decisions produce better outcomes. Better outcomes, accumulated across many situations over time, constitute the win that the chapter title names. The win is not guaranteed in any single situation. The calm person who sees more clearly may still be outmaneuvered by the reactive person who has more power, more resources, or more fortunate circumstances. What the calm produces is not the certainty of the good outcome. It is the consistent improvement of the probability of it, the maintained access to the full cognitive architecture in conditions where most people's is partially offline. The 10 chapters that follow build this architecture layer by layer, beginning with the foundational distinction between the calm and reactive minds, building through the specific mechanisms of emotional takeover, the practices of emotional control, the pressure management, the clear situational reading, the mistake avoidance, and the response discipline, arriving at the integrated qualities of calm confidence, social power, and the long-term stability through which the consistent winning accumulates. Each layer builds on the previous. The architecture is cumulative, and it begins with the most fundamental contrast: what the calm mind is and what the reactive mind is. Chapter 1: Calm versus reactive minds. Calm is not the absence of emotion, it is control. The distinction between the calm mind and the reactive mind is not the distinction between the person who feels and the person who does not feel. That distinction does not exist. The person who feels nothing in response to significant events has not achieved calm. They have achieved a different kind of impairment. The person who has achieved genuine calm feels everything. The high stakes, the provocation, the social pressure, the frustration, the anxiety, all of it arrives with the same intensity that it arrives for the reactive person. What is different is the subsequent relationship between the feeling and the behavior. The reactive mind has a direct, short-arcuate relationship between the emotional state and the behavioral output. The feeling activates, and the behavior follows rapidly and automatically, governed by the emotional state rather than by the deliberate assessment of what the situation actually requires. This directness is the reactive mind's defining feature, and it is not primarily a moral failing. It is the natural default of a cognitive system that was shaped for environments in which the fast, direct relationship between threat and response was the appropriate operating mode. The calm mind has a different relationship, not the absence of the feeling. The feeling is there, but the feeling does not directly govern the behavior. Between the feeling and the behavioral output, there is the deliberate mind, the cognitive system that assesses the situation, evaluates the options, and produces the response that the genuine requirements of the situation warrant rather than the response that the emotional state is driving. This intermediary layer is the calm, not the emotional flatness, the governed translation of the emotional experience into deliberate behavior. Emotional versus rational thinking is not a binary. The two systems are always operating simultaneously, always interacting, always influencing each other. What varies is the relative dominance of each system in any given moment. In the calm state, the rational system maintains sufficient influence over the translation from emotional experience to behavioral output that the behavior reflects genuine assessment. In the reactive state, the emotional system has assumed dominant control of the translation, and the behavior reflects the emotional state rather than the deliberate assessment. The practical difference in the outputs of these two states is the difference that determines outcomes across every significant life domain. The relationship exchange conducted from the calm state engages with the actual relational dynamics and produces the communication that serves the relationship's genuine development. The same exchange conducted from the reactive state engages with the emotional activation and produces the communication that serves the activation's demand for expression. One advances the relationship, one damages it. Both feel, from the inside of the activated state, like the authentic response. Reaction patterns are the specific, consistent, identifiable sequences of emotional activation and behavioral output that characterize the reactive mind across its typical triggering situations. The pattern is not random. The same trigger reliably produces the same activation, which reliably produces the same behavioral output. The person who reliably becomes defensive in response to any input that resembles criticism has a specific reaction pattern. The person who reliably escalates in response to any behavior that resembles disrespect has a specific reaction pattern. These patterns are consistent because they are the repeated expression of the established neural infrastructure that the consistent repetition of the pattern has built. The specific cost of the reaction pattern is not primarily the single bad instance, the single defensive response, the single escalation. It is the pattern itself, which communicates to others the specific information about where the triggers are, how reliably they fire, and how consistently the reactive output follows. This information is used consciously or unconsciously by the people in the reactive person's environment. The triggers are known, the patterns are anticipated. The reactions are, in some cases, deliberately produced to manipulate the reactive person's behavior. The calm person's reaction patterns are less reliable and less legible, not because they have no emotional responses, they do, but because the deliberate intermediary layer keeps the behavioral output from directly expressing the emotional state, which means the observers cannot reliably predict the behavioral output from the emotional input. This unpredictability is itself a form of psychological power. The person whose behavior cannot be reliably predicted by the social environment that is trying to manipulate it is the person who is governing their behavior from the inside rather than having it governed from the outside. Stability is the quality that the calm mind builds over time through the consistent practice of the deliberate intermediary layer. Not the stability of the unchanging flat effect, but the stability of the consistent behavioral quality across the variable emotional landscape. The calm person has good days and difficult ones, high activation states and low ones, rewarding interactions and frustrating ones. What does not change is the quality of the behavioral governance, the maintained standard that the deliberate intermediary layer produces regardless of what the emotional weather is doing. This behavioral stability is what others experience as the trustworthiness of the calm person. The person who is the same person in the difficult moment as in the comfortable one, who maintains their values and their quality of engagement across the conditions that most test them, is the person who can be genuinely relied upon. The reliance is not emotional. It is behavioral. It is the specific knowledge that this person's behavior is governed from their own internal standard rather than from the emotional weather of the moment. Building the calm mind is the project of this audiobook. Each chapter develops a specific dimension of the capacity that the calm mind requires. This first chapter has established the foundational contrast. Chapter 2 examines the specific mechanism through which the reactive mind takes over the specific neurological and psychological process that the subsequent chapters' practices are built to govern. Chapter 2: Why emotions take over. Emotions are faster than logic. The speed asymmetry between the emotional and the rational systems is the most important single fact about the architecture of psychological control, and it has been developed in several earlier audiobooks of this series. Here it is examined specifically in the context of why even intelligent, experienced, Genuinely well-intentioned people find themselves governed by their emotional states in the situations where they most want to be governed by their deliberate minds. The emotional response to any incoming stimulus precedes the rational evaluation of it by a significant margin. The threat detection, the status evaluation, the relational significance assessment, these processes complete in the amygdala and the associated emotional systems in milliseconds, before the prefrontal cortex has had the opportunity to engage with the situation. The emotional state that results from this rapid processing is already present, already shaping the perception of the situation, already pressing toward the behavioral output. By the time the rational evaluation has begun, the rational evaluation is playing catch-up from the beginning. Brain shortcuts are the specific cognitive mechanisms that make the emotional dominance efficient and economical in the situations where efficient economy is the right operating mode. The shortcut matches the current situation to the stored pattern of past similar situations and generates the response that worked in past similar situations, without the need for the full deliberate analysis that genuine novelty would require. This shortcut is genuinely useful for the enormous category of familiar situations where the past pattern is a good guide to the current requirements. It is specifically harmful in the situations where the current situation is different in important ways from the past patterns it resembles, where the shortcut produces the past elaborated response to a present situation that warrants something different. Emotional dominance is the condition in which the emotional system's rapid, shortcut-based assessment has captured the behavioral governance before the rational system's slower, more complete analysis has been able to engage. The emotional dominance is not a failure, it is the designed operation of a system that gives the fast system priority precisely because the fast system was historically the one whose speed was most survival relevant. The problem is the application of survival mode priority to the modern social and professional situations where the slow system's completeness is more valuable than the fast system's speed. Impulsivity is the behavioral expression of emotional dominance, the action taken before the deliberate evaluation has been completed, governed by the emotional state's urgency rather than by the rational system's assessment. The impulsive action is not typically irrational in the narrow sense of violating logical principles. It is typically the perfectly reasonable response to the emotional state's assessment of the situation, the assessment that was made fast, with pattern matching rather than full analysis, and that may be significantly inaccurate in ways the emotional system cannot access from inside the activated state. The specific vulnerability that the emotional speed advantage creates for the rational governance of behavior is the commitment problem. By the time the rational system has had the opportunity to evaluate the situation and generate the better response, the emotional system has already produced an output that creates a social commitment. The sharp reply has been delivered. The defensive posture has been adopted. The impulsive decision has been communicated. The rational system arrives to find that the situation has already been shaped by the emotional system's faster action, and the reshaping of a situation after a commitment has been made is significantly more difficult than the governance of the behavior before the commitment. This commitment problem is why the practices of this audiobook are built around the pause and the deliberate intermediary layer rather than around the replacement of the emotional response with the rational one after the emotional output has been produced. The prevention of the premature commitment, the maintenance of the behavioral output, and the governance of the deliberate mind rather than the expression of the emotional state is the specific intervention point that the pause provides. Emotions are faster than logic. This speed advantage cannot be eliminated. The emotional system will always complete its assessment before the rational system can engage. What can be built is the specific interval between the emotional output and the behavioral output that keeps the fast emotional assessment from becoming the direct behavioral expression without the rational evaluation's governance. That interval is the pause. The pause is what the subsequent chapters build into a reliable, automatic feature of the person's engagement with the situations that most powerfully activate the emotional system. Understanding the mechanism, the speed asymmetry, the shortcut engagement, the commitment problem is the cognitive foundation of the emotional control practice. You cannot govern a process you do not understand. The understanding of Chapter 2 is the prerequisite for the practices of Chapter 3. Chapter 3. The power of emotional control. Control over your emotions is control over your life. The power statement in the hook requires the precision that keeps it from becoming the generic claim that most people have heard too many times to take seriously. The precision is this: the specific mechanism through which emotional control produces control over life outcomes is the reduction of the variance in behavioral quality that the uncontrolled emotional state generates. The uncontrolled emotional state produces high-variance behavior, sometimes excellent when conditions are favorable, sometimes poor when conditions are difficult. The controlled emotional state produces low-variance behavior, consistently good enough even in the difficult conditions, which is a significantly more valuable behavioral profile than the high-variance one across the full span of a life. The specific domains in which the reduced variance of the controlled emotional state produces the most significant life outcome improvements are the domains in which the most important decisions and the most important relationships are concentrated: the professional environment, the close relationships, and the management of the extended difficult periods that every genuinely engaged life contains. In the professional environment, the person whose behavioral quality maintains its standard under pressure, who delivers the same quality of thinking, the same quality of communication, the same quality of judgment whether the conditions are comfortable or demanding, is the person who earns the specific professional trust that the high-variance person cannot. The high-variance person may perform better in the comfortable conditions, but the professional environment is not primarily selecting for comfortable condition performance. It is selecting for reliable performance across the full range of conditions, including and especially the difficult ones. The controlled person's low variance is the specific professional asset. Regulation is the specific practice of emotional control, the ongoing, active governance of the relationship between emotional experience and behavioral output, not the suppression of the emotional experience, which is both neurologically counterproductive and behaviorally brittle. The active, deliberate governance of what the emotional experience produces as behavioral output, through the specific mechanisms of the physiological regulation, the cognitive redescription, and the deliberate pause that the preceding audiobooks of this series have developed. The regulation practice begins with the awareness practice, the specific attentiveness to the early signals of emotional activation that allows the regulation to begin before the activation has escalated to the level where governance is most difficult. The early awareness is the most practically powerful element of the regulation because it places the intervention at the point in the activation sequence where the intervention is most effective and least costly. The person who notices the activation at its early stage can apply the minimal intervention of the brief pause and the physiological regulation to prevent the escalation to the level where the governance requires much more resource and produces much less reliable results. Awareness is the second component of the emotional control practice and is both the prerequisite for the regulation and the ongoing monitoring function that keeps the regulation practice current. Awareness in this context is the specific, practiced attentiveness to the internal state. What is my current activation level? What is the quality of my current emotional experience? What narrative is the emotional system currently generating about the situation I am in? These questions direct attention to the information that the regulation practice needs to work with, rather than allowing the internal state to operate invisibly in the background while its outputs govern the behavior. Stability is the outcome that the consistent regulation and awareness practices produce over time, the specific quality of the behavioral profile that the low-variance governance generates. The stable person is not the person who never experiences difficult emotional states. They are the person whose difficult emotional states do not produce the behavioral degradation that most people's do. The difficulty is fully experienced internally. The behavior maintains its quality. The internal and the external are running different programs, and the external program is the one that the deliberate mind has written rather than the one the emotional system is running. The specific experience of the stable person in the difficult conditions is worth naming because it is frequently mischaracterized as coldness or indifference. The stable person is not cold, they are fully engaged with the emotional reality of the situation. What is different is the direction of the governance. The emotional reality is informing the deliberate mind, which is producing the behavioral output. The emotional reality is not directly expressing itself as the behavioral output. This distinction between the emotion as input to the deliberate mind and the emotion as direct driver of the behavioral output is the entirety of the emotional control that this chapter is about. Control over your emotions is control over your life because the life that you live in the world is the life produced by your behavioral outputs, by the decisions you make, the communications you produce, the treatment of others and of opportunities that your behavior constitutes. Those behavioral outputs, governed by your emotional states rather than by your deliberate mind, produce a life that is to a significant degree the expression of the emotional states rather than the expression of the deliberate choices. The emotional control practice relames the behavioral outputs for the deliberate mind, which is the specific reclamation of the governance of the life that the control of the emotions represents. Chapter 4. Staying calm under pressure. Calm under pressure is rare and powerful. The rarity of genuine calm under genuine pressure is the specific quality that makes it powerful. In comfortable conditions, many people display the calm behavior that the comfortable conditions make available. There is nothing difficult about appearing composed when nothing is pressing. The composure that holds under genuine pressure when the stakes are high, when the provocation is real, when the circumstances are specifically designed to produce the activated state and the reactive behavior is a different quality, built rather than naturally available, and visible to others precisely because of its rarity in the conditions that most consistently produce its opposite. The stress response that pressure activates is the same mechanism described in the neurological chapters of the earlier audiobooks in this series: the amygdala activation, the cortisol flooding, the prefrontal suppression, the attentional narrowing. The specific challenge of staying calm under pressure is the maintenance of the regulated state against the specific physiological changes that the pressure is producing in the body and the brain. This maintenance is not primarily a cognitive act. It cannot be achieved through the determination to be calm, through the intellectual commitment to regulated behavior, through the aspiration to maintain composure. It requires the specific physiological interventions that counteract the stress response at the level of the body. The physiological foundation of calm under pressure is the deliberate engagement of the parasympathetic nervous system, the regulatory system that counteracts the sympathetic activation that the stress response has engaged. The breath regulation is the most direct and most immediately available intervention. The deliberate, slow, full breath that changes the body signals to the brain, reduces the heart rate, and begins to reduce the cortisol flooding that is degrading the working memory capacity. The physical slowing, the deliberate reduction of movement pace, speech rate, and physical tension is the second intervention that signals to the physiological system that the survival mode urgency is not warranted. These interventions are not dramatic. They are brief and specific, and they produce real physiological changes that directly improve the cognitive quality available for the pressure situation. The calm thinking that follows the physiological regulation is the cognitive dimension of staying calm under pressure, the specific practice of engaging the deliberate cognitive processes with the actual situation once the physiological regulation has partially restored the prefrontal axis that the stress response was suppressing. The calm thinking in pressure conditions is not the elaborate analysis that comfortable conditions allow. The pressure situation does not provide the time for that. It is the brief, specific, accurate redescription of what is actually happening. What is the situation? Stripped of the emotional amplification that the activated state is adding? What does it actually require? What is available? Control is the specific outcome that the physiological regulation plus the calm thinking produces in pressure conditions, the maintained governance of the behavioral output by the deliberate mind rather than the direct expression of the activated emotional state. Not perfect control. The pressure is real and the activation is real and the governance is never completely effortless. The specific, practiced, incrementally more reliable governance of the deliberate mind in the conditions that most powerfully press toward the reactive default. Building the capacity for genuine calm under genuine pressure follows the progressive loading practice that several earlier chapters have described. Consistent practice at the level of challenge that genuinely extends the capacity without overwhelming the regulatory architecture, followed by the recovery that allows the adaptation. In the pressure management context, this means the consistent practice of the regulation practices in the lower intensity pressure situations of daily life, the mildly frustrating exchange, the minor professional challenge, the small social pressure, building the capacity through accumulated practice rather than attempting to deploy a capacity that has not been built in the situations that most require it. The specific measure of progress in the calm under pressure development is not the absence of activation. The activation will continue to be produced by the pressure situations as reliably as it always was. The measure is the speed and the completeness of the regulation. The earlier in the activation sequence the regulation begins, the smaller the level of activation the regulation must counteract. and the more complete the restoration of the deliberate cognitive mode before the behavioral output must be produced. Progress looks like the earlier recognition, the faster regulation, the more complete restoration, not the prevention of activation, but the improved governance of it. Calm under pressure is rare and powerful. The rarity comes from the specific demands of the development of physiological regulation practices. The progressive loading across many instances of managed pressure, the accumulated evidence of maintained composure that builds the specific self-knowledge that genuine composed functioning is available in the conditions that most test it. The power comes from the specific advantages, the cognitive quality, the decision quality, the social influence that the regulated state produces when the people around the calm person have lost access to them. Chapter 5. Reading situations clearly. When you are calm, you see more. The perceptual advantage of the calm state is one of the most specifically powerful and most consistently underappreciated dimensions of why calm people win. It is underappreciated because the perceptual benefit is invisible. The calm person does not announce that they are seeing more of the situation than the activated people around them. They simply act on what they see, and the quality of the actions that flow from the fuller picture is the visible expression of the invisible perceptual advantage. The mechanism of the perceptual advantage was described in Chapter 2 of the Calm Under Pressure audiobook and in Chapter 2 of the Think Clearly When Others Panic audiobook. The activated state narrows attention toward the perceived threat, suppressing the broader attentional field that the calm state maintains. This attentional narrowing is the specific mechanism through which the activated person is working with less of the situational information than the calm person in the same situation. Not because the information is less available to the activated person, the objective information environment is the same. Because the activated attentional system is attending to a smaller subset of it. The dimensions of this situational picture that the broader attentional field of the calm state includes, and the activated state's tunnel vision excludes, are specific and worth naming. The relational dynamics beneath the surface content of the interaction, who is aligned with whom, whose interests are served by which outcomes, what the unsaid positions are beneath the stated ones, the inconsistencies between the stated positions and the behavioral signals, the verbal content that claims one thing while the tone, the pacing, the physical comportment claim another, and the structural context, the longer-term trajectory of the situation before the current moment, which the calm observer's broader temporal frame includes and the urgency compressed activated state excludes. Reading situations clearly is therefore not a separate skill from the calm state. It is the natural perceptual expression of the maintained broad attentional field that the calm state provides. The person who has built the genuine calm has automatically built the clearer situational reading. The two are the same thing expressed at different levels: the internal regulation at the level of the emotional state, and the broader, more accurate perception at the level of the situational assessment. The specific practice of reading situations clearly is the deliberate attentional practice of the observer position, the partial step back from the fully immersed participant role to the observer role that sees the fuller picture. In the calm state, this step is relatively small because the broad attentional field is already partially available. In the activated state, the step is more demanding because the activation is pressing the attention toward the threat rather than toward the broader picture. The practice of the observer position in the ordinary low captivation situations builds the habit that makes it more available in the high captivation situations where it is most valuable. The practical application of the clearer situational reading is the improved quality of the responses that the fuller information base produces. The response that is calibrated to the full picture, including the relational dynamics, the behavioral inconsistencies, and the structural context, is more precisely targeted, more effectively communicated, and more likely to produce the intended outcome than the response that is calibrated only to the emotionally amplified subset of the situation that the activated state was attending to. When you are calm, you see more. The seeing is not mystical or exceptional. It is the specific perceptual consequence of the maintained broad attentional field that the regulated state preserves. The development of the calm is the development of the seeing, and the seeing is the specific informational foundation from which the precision and the judgment that characterize the genuinely effective engagement with situations are built. Chapter 6 develops the specific application of the clearer situational reading to the avoidance of the specific category of costly mistakes that the emotionally governed engagement with situations most reliably produces. Chapter 6. Avoiding emotional mistakes. The most expensive decisions are the emotional ones. Emotional mistakes are a specific category of decision errors that are distinguishable from the ordinary errors of insufficient information or inadequate analysis. Ordinary errors are made from the honest limits of what was known and what could be analyzed. Emotional mistakes are made from the temporary impairment of the analytical process by the emotional activation from the state in which the information was available and the analysis could have been conducted but was not, because the emotional state had captured the behavioral governance before the analytical process could engage. The most expensive decisions are the emotional ones because the cost of the emotional mistake is typically disproportionate to the size of the emotional activation that produced it. The sharp reply produced by a brief activation of the defensive response. The impulsive commitment produced by a brief surge of excitement. The relationship-damaging communication produced by an hour of resentment. The financial decision produced by the anxiety of the uncertain moment. In each case, the activation is brief, the decision is permanent, and the disproportion between the emotional event and its consequence is the specific feature that makes the avoidance of emotional mistakes so specifically worth developing. The specific categories of emotional mistake follow the categories of emotional activation that most commonly produce them. The anger-driven mistake, the communication or decision produced from the fully activated defensive or aggressive state that serves the anger's need for expression rather than the situation's actual requirements. These mistakes are the most immediately visible and the most immediately regretted. But the regret arrives after the commitment has been made and the damage has been done. The anxiety-driven mistake, the premature commitment or the premature withdrawal produced from the urgency of the uncertain and uncomfortable state. The anxiety's demand for resolution of the uncertainty drives the decision before the information necessary for the good decision has been gathered, or drives the withdrawal from the situation before the genuine engagement with its requirements has been completed. The anxiety-driven mistake is typically the opposite of the anger-driven one in its visible quality. It looks like caution rather than aggression, but it produces its own specific category of costly outcomes. The excitement driven mistake, the impulsive overcommitment produced from the temporarily elevated positive emotional state. The exciting opportunity that is committed to before the realistic assessment of its actual requirements and its actual match with the person's genuine capabilities and genuine priorities. The excitement-driven mistake is the least immediately visible because it is produced by a positive emotional state and often produces a positive immediate outcome before the costs of the cover commitment become apparent in the weeks and months that follow. The specific practice for avoiding emotional mistakes is the deliberate establishment of the decision delay in the presence of significant emotional activation. Not the permanent prevention of decision-making. Decisions must be made, and the decision delay practice is calibrated to the specific activation level that warrants it. Not applied universally to all decisions in all states. The specific commitment in the presence of significant emotional activation. Significant decisions will not be made until the activation has reduced to the level at which the deliberate analytical process can genuinely engage with the decision. The decision delay practice is a form of the pre-commitment discipline developed in Chapter 5 of the Discipline Over Motivation chapter of the Mental Strength audiobook. The pre-commitment is made in the calm state when my activation level is above this threshold. I will not make decisions in these categories. The pre-commitment is then honored when the activation is high, which is specifically the condition in which the in-the-moment override of the activation is most difficult. The pre-commitment sidesteps the in-the-moment difficulty by removing the decision from the domain of the activated state's authority. The most expensive decisions are the emotional ones. The cost of the activation-driven mistake is typically higher than the cost of the delayed decision that the decision delay practice produces. The relationship damage, the professional consequence, the financial loss, the opportunity for closure, these are the specific costs that the brief but costly activation produces when the governance of the deliberate mind is not in place between the feeling and the decision. The development of the calm that maintains that governance is the development of the most reliable insurance against the specific category of self-inflicted costly outcomes that the emotional mistake represents. Chapter 7. Responding instead of reacting. A response is chosen, a reaction is automatic. The distinction between a response and a reaction is the distinction between a choice and an automatic output, the same distinction that has appeared in several earlier audiobooks of this series and is developed here specifically in the context of the calm person's behavioral advantage over the reactive one. The response is the behavioral output of the deliberate mind. The reaction is the behavioral output of the emotional system operating without the deliberate mind's governance. Both the response and the reaction can have the same surface content. The calm person and the reactive person may say the same words, take the same action, produce the same apparent behavioral output. What is different is the process that produced it and the consistency with which that process produces the same quality of output across different conditions. The calm person's response was produced by the deliberate process. It reflects the assessment of the situation, the evaluation of the options, and the selection of the response that the situation's genuine requirements warrant. The reactive person's reaction was produced by the emotional system. It reflects the activation level, the pattern match to past situations, and the behavioral output that the past pattern associated with that activation. The consistency advantage of the response over the reaction is the most practically significant dimension of the distinction. The deliberate process that produces responses is applied consistently to the situation's actual features, which means it produces consistently appropriate outputs across the range of situations it encounters. The automatic process that produces reactions is applied to the pattern match rather than to the actual features, which means it produces appropriate outputs in the situations that closely match the past patterns and inappropriate outputs in the situations that superficially resemble the past patterns but are actually different in important ways. The development of the response capacity over the reaction default is the specific project of the pause architecture that the earlier chapters have been building. The pause is the interval that separates the incoming stimulus from the behavioral output, the space in which the deliberate process has the opportunity to engage with the situation before the reaction executes. The development of the pause is a reliable, automatic feature of the person's engagement with the high activation situations is the development of the response capacity, the consistent production of the deliberate output rather than the automatic one. Calm responses have specific qualities that distinguish them from reactive outputs and that produce specific social effects. The first quality is proportionality. The calm response is calibrated to what the situation actually requires rather than to what the emotional activation is driving. The sharp challenge that produces the brief, accurate, non-defensive response in the calm person produces the co-isolated defensive response in the reactive one. The proportional response communicates something specific, that the challenge was processed by the deliberate mind and found to warrant exactly this much response, no more, no less. The disproportionate reaction communicates the opposite, that the challenge produced a reaction whose size reflects the activation rather than the situation. The second quality of the calm response is precision, the specific targeting of the response at the actual substance of the situation rather than at the emotional charge that the situation carried. The precise response addresses what is actually there. The reactive response addresses the emotional charge, which may be larger or smaller than what is actually there, depending on the activation state's amplification or suppression. The third quality is timing. The calm response is produced at the moment that serves the genuine requirements of the situation rather than at the moment that discharges the activation. The reactive response is produced when the activation demands expression. The calm response is produced when the situation is ready for it, which may be the same moment, or may be significantly later, depending on what the situation's actual requirements are. The willingness to produce the response at the right moment rather than the emotionally urgent moment is the specific manifestation of the patience that the calm mind's governance of its own behavior produces. A response is chosen, a reaction is automatic. The choice is where the power lies, the specific power of the person whose behavioral output is the expression of their deliberate mind rather than the output of the activated system that the situation was attempting to manipulate. Building the choice capacity is building the specific behavioral freedom that the calm person has and the reactive person has surrendered to the automatic pattern. Chapter 8. Calm confidence. True confidence is quiet. The quiet confidence of the genuinely calm person is one of the most specifically recognizable and most consistently mischaracterized qualities in the social landscape. It is mischaracterized because it does not display the markers that the cultural narrative associates with confidence: the assertive presence, the loud voice, the forceful occupation of social space, the continuous demonstration of capability. The calm person who says less, who does not assert their position with force, who allows the silence to exist rather than filling it with the performance of competence. This person is frequently misread as less confident, less capable, less in command. The misreading reverses on examination. The quiet confidence of the calm person is genuinely more confident than the performed confidence of the loud one. The performed confidence is dependent on the social environment's recognition of the performance for its maintenance. When the recognition is withdrawn, when the performance is challenged, when the social environment does not respond with the validating feedback the performance was generating, the performed confidence collapses, revealing the anxiety that it was compensating for. The genuine confidence does not depend on the social recognition for its maintenance because it is based on the accurate, well-evidenced internal assessment rather than on the social performance. The internal architecture of genuine calm confidence was described at length in the Quiet Confidence chapter of the Quiet Power audiobook. Here it is developed specifically in the context of the calm person's psychological advantage. The quiet confidence is both the expression of the built calm and the specific social signal that communicates the quality of person that the calm represents. The social effect of quiet confidence is the specific effect of the calm and stable presence on the people around it. The social environment is continuously calibrating its assessment of every person within it. The question of who can be relied upon, who has the genuine capability beneath the performance, who is the stable reference point when the pressure rises. Quiet confidence communicates the answer to these calibration questions more reliably than the performed confidence does, because the quiet confidence is the expression of a genuine internal state rather than the management of an impression. The development of quiet confidence follows the same path as the development of the calm. It expresses through the consistent practice of the governed behavior in the situations that most test it, through the accumulated evidence of functioning well under genuine difficulty, through the honest self-assessment that knows specifically what has been demonstrated and what the genuine limits of the current development are. The confidence that is built from this evidence is the specific confidence that holds under challenge, because the challenge cannot undermine an assessment that is based on honest evidence rather than on the aspiration or the performance. The non-defensive quality of genuine calm confidence is one of its most specifically powerful social expressions. The person who can receive challenge, criticism, and disagreement without the defensive escalation that insecurity produces is demonstrating visibly, unmistakably, that their self-assessment does not depend on the absence of challenge for its maintenance. The challenge cannot undermine the confident assessment because the confident assessment is not based on the absence of challenge. It is based on the evidence of functioning through challenges that are now behind them. True confidence is quiet because it does not need to be loud. The cloudness of performed confidence is the volume of the anxiety it is covering. The quiet of genuine confidence is the silence of the person who does not need to perform what they actually are. The building of the genuine confidence is the building of the actual architecture, the actual demonstrated capability, the actual record of maintained composure under pressure, the actual consistent behavioral quality across the full range of conditions. The confidence follows from the architecture. It does not precede it. The quiet of genuine confidence is the quiet of the person who wins without announcing it, whose contributions carry weight not because they are delivered loudly, but because they are delivered from the position of genuine assessment and genuine capability. The social recognition of this quality, which builds over time in any environment where the quiet, confident person is a consistent presence, is the specific form of influence that this chapter describes and that Chapter 9 examines in the social domain. Chapter 9: Social Power of Calmness. The calmest person shapes the room. The social power of calmness operates through the specific mechanism of the emotional contagion described in Chapter 5 of the Calm Under Pressure audiobook and Chapter 9 of the Quiet Power audiobook. The mechanism is the automatic mirroring of emotional states between individuals through the limbic resonance processes of the social brain, the mechanism through which the calm person's regulated state signals press the social environment toward a lower activation level, and through which the activated person's high energy signals press the environment toward a higher one. The shaping of the room that the calmest person produces is not a deliberate social strategy. It is the automatic expression of the contagion mechanism running in the direction of the calm person's regulated state. The calm person is not intending to shape the room, they are maintaining their own regulation. And the social shaping is the automatic downstream consequence of the consistent regulated state signals they are producing in the shared emotional environment. The intention is the self-governance. The room shaping is the byproduct. The specific quality of the social influence that calmness produces is different from the social influence that assertiveness, volume, or positional authority produce. Assertiveness influences through the social pressure of the assertion. Volume influences through the attention capture of the loud signal. Positional authority influences through the social compliance with formal hierarchy. Calmness influences through the neurological mechanism of the contagion through the direct, precognitive shaping of the emotional states of the people in the environment. This influence is the most fundamental form available because it operates before the deliberate cognitive evaluation of what to do. It shapes the state from which the deliberate evaluation is conducted. The social authority that the calm person develops over time in any consistent social environment is the accumulated expression of this influence. The calm person is, over time, recognized as the stabilizing force, the person whose presence consistently reduces the anxiety level of the room, whose quality of engagement consistently models the deliberate cooperative mode, whose behavioral stability consistently demonstrates that the quality of engagement is available regardless of the conditions. This recognition builds the specific form of authority that no formal designation can provide, the authority of the person who has demonstrated, consistently and across the full range of conditions, the specific qualities that the social environment needs most when conditions are most difficult. The social power of calmness in conflict situations is one of its most practically significant expressions. The conflict environment is specifically designed by its temperature, its competing activation levels, and its reciprocal escalation dynamic to prevent the calm engagement from both parties simultaneously. The person who maintains their regulation in the conflict, while the other party escalates, is doing something that the conflict environment was specifically designed to prevent. And the specific social effect of that maintained regulation is the interruption of the escalation dynamic that the conflict depends on for its intensity. Without the reciprocal matching of the escalation cannot sustain itself. The influence that the calm person has in the conflict context is therefore the specific influence of the person who is not playing the conflict's game, who is not providing the reciprocal activation that the escalation requires. This non-compliance with the conflict's operating requirements is simultaneously a demonstration of the genuine internal regulation and a specific strategic advantage. The person who maintains their quality of engagement in the conditions that most test it is the person who is most likely to produce the outcomes that the conflict could not prevent them from working toward. The calmest person shapes the room. The shaping is real, consistent, and operates through the specific neurological and social mechanisms described above. Building the capacity to be the calmest person in the room to produce the consistent regulated state signals in the conditions that most powerfully press toward activation is the building of the specific social influence that this chapter describes. The influence is the byproduct. The capacity is the development. The development is the 10 chapters of this audiobook. Chapter 10 integrates everything into the identity of the person who wins through stability, the cumulative expression of the calm person's advantage across the span of the situations that the engaged life produces. Chapter 10. Winning through stability. The person who stays stable always has the advantage. The advantage of stability is not the dramatic advantage of the superior move or the decisive victory in the single high-stakes confrontation. It is the cumulative advantage that accumulates across many situations over time as the consistent quality differential between the stable person's behavioral outputs and the reactive person's outputs compounds into the specific life outcome difference that the word winning names. The compounding mechanism is simple and specific in each individual situation. The stable person produces a behavioral output that is marginally better than the reactive person's, more accurate, more proportional, more aligned with the genuine requirements of the situation. The margin in any single situation is small, often invisible to casual observation. Across many situations over a significant time period, the accumulated margin is enormous. The quality of the relationships, the quality of the professional outcomes, the quality of the decisions, the quality of the management of the extended difficult periods that every genuine life contains. All of these accumulate in the direction of the person whose behavioral quality is consistent rather than variable. The specific dimensions of the winning through stability that are most practically significant are the long-term relationship quality, the professional trajectory, and the management of life's major challenges. In relationships, the stable person's consistency of engagement, the same quality of attention, the same standards of behavior, the same values expressed across the comfortable and the difficult conditions builds the specific form of relational trust that is most durable and most genuinely valuable. Not the trust of the person who is always pleasant. That trust is condition dependent and fails when conditions change. The trust of the person who is always themselves, whose quality of character is predictable across conditions, which is the trust that the most significant relationships are built on. In the professional domain, the stable person's maintained quality across all conditions is the specific professional asset described in Chapter 3, the low-variance behavioral profile that the professional environment selects for in the genuinely high-stakes roles. The person who can be trusted to perform at the same quality when conditions are difficult as when they are comfortable is the person who can be trusted with the situations that most require reliable performance. This trustworthiness is built from the accumulated evidence of many instances of maintained quality under genuine pressure, and it cannot be claimed, only demonstrated. In the management of major challenges, the extended difficult periods, the significant losses, the sustained adversity, that every genuinely engaged life contains, the stable person's maintained quality is the specific resource that makes the navigation of the challenge possible without the additional damage of the reactive pattern's costs. The major challenge is difficult enough on its own terms. The reactive person is navigating the challenge and simultaneously managing the fallout from the reactive behavior that the challenge's pressure is producing. The stable person is navigating the challenge without the additional burden. The difference in navigational quality that this produces over the extended duration of the major challenge is one of the most specific and most significant expressions of the winning through stability that this chapter names. The identity of the stable person, the specific self-concept that makes the consistent behavioral quality the natural expression of who they are rather than the effortful maintenance of a goal, is the final layer of the development that this audiobook has been building. The stable identity is the product of the accumulated evidence from many instances of maintained quality under genuine pressure. Each instance adds to the evidence. The evidence builds the identity. The identity sustains the behavior that generates more evidence. The virtuous cycle produces, over time, the specific person who wins through stability, whose advantage is not a single extraordinary quality, but the consistent expression of the ordinary qualities that most people can only maintain in ordinary conditions. The person who stays stable always has the advantage, not over others as people. The stability is not about competition in the interpersonal sense, over the conditions that most consistently degrade others' behavioral quality, over the pressure that most consistently produces the reactive default, over the provocation that most consistently captures others' attention and governance. The stability is the specific advantage of the person who remains themselves, who maintains the deliberate governance of their own behavior in the conditions that are specifically designed to prevent it. That is the win. That is what the calm produces. That is what this audiobook has been building. Closing. The win that compounds. 10 chapters, 1 developed quality. The quality of the person whose emotional life is fully present and fully felt, and whose behavioral output is governed by the deliberate mind rather than directly expressed by the emotional state. The calm that is not the absence of feeling but the specific, built architecture of its governance, and the win that compounds slowly, invisibly, inexorably across the many situations that the engaged life produces. Chapter 1 established the foundational contrast. Calm is not the absence of emotion. It is control, the deliberate intermediary layer between the emotional experience and the behavioral output, the stability that the consistent governance produces, and the specific social information that the stable behavioral pattern communicates to others. Chapter 2 mapped the mechanism of emotional dominance, the speed asymmetry, the brain shortcuts, the commitment problem that arises when the fast emotional system has produced the behavioral commitment before the rational evaluation can engage, and the specific implication: the intervention must be before the commitment, not after. Chapter 3 developed the power of emotional control, the specific reduction of behavioral variance that the regulated state produces, and the specific value of the low variance behavioral profile across the full range of conditions. Regulation, awareness, and stability as the 3 interlocking components of the emotional control practice. Chapter 4 built the physiological foundation of calm under pressure, the parasympathetic regulation practices that counteract the stress response at the neurological level. The calm thinking that engages the restored deliberate cognitive mode, and the progressive development through the consistent practice across the range of pressure intensities. Chapter 5 developed the perceptual advantage, the broader attentional field of the calm state that sees the relational dynamics, the behavioral inconsistencies, and the structural context that the activated tunnel vision misses. The clearer situational reading as the natural perceptual expression of the maintained calm. Chapter 6 addressed emotional mistakes, the specific, expensive category of decision errors produced when the emotional activation captures the behavioral governance before the analytical process can engage. The decision delay pre-commitment as the specific practice that removes the decision from the domain of the high activation state's authority. Chapter 7 built the response practice, the chosen, proportional, precisely targeted behavioral output of the deliberate mind versus the automatic, disproportionate, pattern-matched output of the reactive system, the three qualities of the calm response: proportionality, precision, timing, and the specific social advantage each produces. Chapter 8 developed calm confidence, the quiet, evidence-based, non-defensive internal architecture that holds under challenge because it is not dependent on the absence of challenge for its maintenance. The building path demonstrated capability, accumulated evidence, honest self-assessment. Chapter 9 named the social power, the calmest person shapes the room through the contagion mechanism running in the direction of the regulated state. The specific quality of influence that calmness produces, precognitive, fundamental, most powerful in the conditions that most test it. And Chapter 10 named the win, the compounding quality differential across many situations. The relational trust built from consistent behavioral quality, the professional trustworthiness built from maintained performance under pressure, the major challenge navigation conducted without the additional burden of the reactive patterns costs. When emotions rise, and they will rise, the developed architecture governs. You feel it. You observe. You regulate. You think. You respond. With precision. That is the win.